everybody, and welcome back to Dollar Tree Dinners. My name is Rebecca, and this is a little bit out of order. I've already filmed the whole video that you're about to watch, including the intro. But I wanted to hop on here real quick because we are on the topic of the donation meals for the elderly woman that I'm helping and her disabled grandson. And I'm working with the neighbor directly who is coming to pick up the meals, and today she came and picked up batch number 2, and she had a lot of amazing things to say about the first round of this. She basically said that this has changed things for the grandmother, the grandson, and even the son. She was so sweet about it, and it was really heartwarming. She said that they absolutely loved the meals. I did learn, I try not to pry too much, and I'm being careful about what information I divulge on the internet, but I did learn that the grandson has spina bifida, and the grandmother, she has early onset dementia. Within this, there is the son who has a family of his own, and he checks in on his mother every single day and oftentimes cooks dinner for her. And this has also changed things for him as well, because it has made the process of him making sure that she's fed and she goes to bed and still having time to get home to his own family to enjoy dinner with them. But the absolute sweetest thing that she told me was that every day that she went to go check on them, the grandson kept asking when the next batch of meals was gonna come, which just absolutely made my entire day. The grandmother does have some in-home aides, so during the day she said that there are aides that kind of assist her with her day-to-day living. So I did get my containers back. They were all washed, so the container swap is totally fine. I mostly just wanted to bring this up because I had a lot of really insightful comments and suggestions, and a lot of you guys were so invested in this process that I definitely wanted to let you know that the meals were very well received. They were very well enjoyed. And at one point in the video, I do mention that the grandmother didn't like the broccoli, but apparently at one of the days, the in-home aides took the broccoli and kind of chopped it up into smaller pieces and added some butter to it. And then the grandmother loved the broccoli. So from now on, broccoli, smaller pieces, add butter. I can totally work with that. To say that this is probably the most rewarding experience that I have ever had is a genuine statement, and I'm really happy that I shared it with you guys, and I'm gonna continue to share it with you guys. And maybe even I can get to a point where I'm making more meals for them on like a twice weekly basis. I don't want to overexert myself because it is a lot of time to put into these meals and planning and shopping, but it gave me purpose. It made me feel so fulfilled, and I am so happy with how it went. So a huge and warm thank you to each and every one of you for all of your uplifting and insightful comments. It's only going to help this process be smoother and better. In this video, we are going to cover several topics related to this meal donation, so stick around for that. But we're also going to be making the second batch of meals, which were just delivered to her today. Oh, and bonus before we get started, here is 30 to 45 seconds of cute dog footage just to make your day a little bit brighter.
Do you want to go bye-bye? Do you want to go see your friends? Speak. Hey, Mama.
Hi, pretty girl. Decided to what?
If I fits, I sits. So.
Today I'm going to be cooking some more meals for the senior that I'm assisting. There are kind of 4 people involved in this process, not including myself. So I am coordinating this directly with her neighbor, who also comes to my home, picks up the meals, delivers them to her. Last time was the first time that I had ever cooked for her, so when the neighbor came by to pick up the meals, she brought them over to her. She helped to put a few of the meals in the freezer. So last time I made 6 breakfasts, 6 lunches, and 6 dinners. So I know from a perspective of if it was just for one person, they're not going to want to eat the same thing every day for 6 days. That was not the case. At this time, I have not met the grandmother or the grandson. They're kind of leery of strangers, and at this point I am still a stranger. So that's why I'm doing all of this through the neighbor, but maybe at some point I could deliver them directly. But if that were to ever happen, it would not happen on camera. I'm just not that kind of a person. So with that being said, I did have a couple couple of concerns about the fact that I'm doing a kind of charitable donation on camera, and it's mostly to inspire people, but also some of you kind of got the vision where I can share recipes that don't generate waste. There are a lot of YouTubers who kind of needlessly generate waste for the sake of making content, and I don't want to be one of those people. Sometimes you guys articulate things better in the comments than I do myself, and somebody said, I like cooking, but more specifically, I like feeding people. And that's kind of how I am too. I really enjoy cooking, but more specifically, I really enjoy seeing other people enjoy the food that I cook. This isn't about chasing clout, it's not about kudos, it's not about props. If it does inspire you to do this for other people, then absolutely feel free. For me, this is a means of being able to share meal prep ideas and meal prep recipes, and then being able to take those meal preps and give them to someone who could benefit more from them than I could personally. I am on a little bit of a time crunch because, as I mentioned, I am coordinating this with the neighbor, and she has something to do this evening, so she needs to be here to pick up the meals around 4:30 today. It's currently 11:30, so that means I only have about 5 hours to cook everything and get it all packed and ready to go. So let's just go ahead and jump right in. Last time I cooked 6 breakfasts, 6 lunches, and 6 dinners, and I had a lot of requests to try to incorporate some more variety into that, which I completely understand. As far as what she liked and didn't like, because again, I did ask for preferences and dietary restrictions. She does not have any dietary restrictions. I want to reiterate that because I had a lot of concerns about carbs and salt and things like that. I was initially told that they like pretty much everything except for asparagus, so I was kind of rolling with that. But I now know that the grandson doesn't like olives and the grandmother doesn't like broccoli. So we're adding on to it, we're learning, and we're adapting. So for her breakfast this week, I'm gonna try to do 2. The first is just gonna be a standard kind of breakfast bowl. I have some russet potatoes, eggs, sausage, and some of the leftover cheese from the meals that I prepped her last week. So that'll be the first breakfast. I'm gonna aim to try to make about 4 to 6 of each meal, and I'm also gonna experiment with freezing a couple of them this week. Start to maybe create a bit of a stockpile in my freezer so that I can later on down the road give her more variety in the meals without having to cook a bunch of different meals later on. Basically creating a little bit of a stockpile that I can rotate through potentially. That's enough talking, let's go ahead and get cooking. I need some of these potatoes for a soup that I want to make her this week, so I'll probably try to use about half of the bag for the breakfasts, and then the other half of the bag I will reserve for the soup. This is a 5-pound bag, so 5 potatoes should be enough for the breakfast bowls. These new cutting boards that I got slide a lot more than some of my older ones, so I'm going to put a wet rag underneath it, kind of keep it stationary, as many of you suggested I do. While I'm doing this chopping, it's probably a good time to talk about one other concern, which was about gloves specifically, because I'm not cooking for myself, I'm cooking for someone else. I am kind of my own production team. I don't have a videographer, I have a tripod, and I have a camera. If I were wearing gloves every single time I go to press record, every single time I go to change the camera angles, or move the tripod, that would require a change of gloves in order to remain sanitary. If this grows into more of a commercial thing like I was talking about in my last video, then that might be something to consider later on down the road. But for the time being, I'm just trying to be mindful, washing my hands very frequently. As you can see, I also wear my hair up, which is something I don't typically do when I'm cooking for myself. My dogs are put away. And before I got started, I did sanitize my kitchen. Another thing is that once the food is cooked, if you didn't notice in my last video, I kind of limit any bare hand contact with the cooked food. I typically use measuring cups or spoons to portion out the food. I'm just asking that you guys have a little bit of faith in me in the process and all of the factors that I do take into consideration before I make a video or put out any content. I don't ever do anything without considering as many aspects of it as I possibly can. So there we go, there's our diced potatoes. That was all 5 of the potatoes. Toss them in some cooking oil, and I'm gonna toss those in some salt, pepper, onion powder, or that was garlic powder, my bad. Garlic powder, onion powder, and paprika. Let's give those a mix to make sure everything's evenly seasoned. And I have a sheet pan that I have sprayed pretty liberally with some nonstick cooking spray because I find that no matter how much you oil potatoes, they do tend to want to stick to everything when they're roasting in the oven. And those are going to get roasted at 400 degrees, probably for about 40 to 45 minutes or so. And I'll toss them halfway through. While my potatoes roast, I'm going to fry up my 1 pound of breakfast sausage. This spatula you guys see me use is actually a fish spatula, and it's easier on my hands and my wrists than some other spatulas are. And I know you can buy those like meat spatulas, but I've just always used this one. I'm not really the type of person to just buy something because it makes things easier when I have a tool that already works for me. I was hoping for a little bit more fat from this sausage because I did want to make a gravy. I guess it's enough. I'm trying to render out a little bit more fat from that. Let's drain that sausage. This is hard because cast iron skillets are so heavy. Let's just do this the regular way. Try to save the fat in there for making a gravy later. Not for this meal prep, for a different one. One of my personal favorites that I'm excited to share with you all. So as far as meal prep goes, one of the ways that I actually get my ideas for meal preps are through actual meal prep services. I subscribe to a few different email newsletters, and like every week they'll roll out a new menu, and I'll check the menu and kind of get some ideas from there on things that I think sound good to me. The neighbor did say that she loved the breakfast that I made last week, which was the meat and cheese omelets in a bowl. Today we're doing, I guess it's kind of similar. It's not entirely similar. More of like a farmer's breakfast or like a country breakfast. Just roasted potatoes with sausage, eggs, and cheese. And then if she wants to throw some like ketchup or salsa or something on it, she definitely can. But I'm going to keep the eggs kind of light on this one. Probably only going to do about 8 eggs for the whole thing. And again, I'm going to season the eggs just with some salt and pepper. I always talk about adding water to make more fluffy eggs, which you can definitely do, but if you want more creamy eggs, you can add milk, cream, or in this case, I'm using half and half. It's been about 20 minutes on the potatoes, so I'm gonna give them a toss. And I might move them to the bottom rack real quick. Hopefully the cooking spray helped a little bit. Oh yeah, much better. All right, let's just give those a toss. They're not really getting crispy, so I am gonna move them to the bottom rack for the last 20 minutes or so. All right, in the meantime, we can scramble our eggs. Eggs are done. Now we're just gonna have to wait on the potatoes. But I'm gonna go ahead and get started on the next breakfast. I'm gonna give her 2 options this week for breakfast. And the second one is one of my personal favorites, one that I make for Michael and I a lot. And it's something that I kind of supplement our meal preps with because it requires very minimal work. So it's something I can just kind of toss together really quickly and bulk out some of our meals. I think she's really going to enjoy it. For those of you who can't eat pork, this is also an option because it's a chicken-based breakfast. Country chicken breakfast bowls, and again, I did get the idea from an actual meal prep service, but it is biscuits, fried chicken, and country gravy. I do typically buy frozen biscuits. I can make them from scratch. I'm on a time crunch here, plus this is no fuss, no mess. I think frozen biscuits are a lot better than canned biscuits. This is a 20 pack and it's like $5. It is definitely cheaper to make your own biscuits for the most part, but these are just as good as homemade. Plus, they don't require any work or mess. And then I always pair them with these Tyson crispy chicken strips, and I'll just toss them in the oven and bake them all together, which is exactly what we're gonna do. And these frozen biscuits are frozen individually, so the benefit of it is that you can just cook kind of what you need for any given occasion, and they go in the oven straight out of the freezer, which is also really easy and beneficial. So I'm thinking about making 4 of these, so I'm only going to cook 8 biscuits. I'll save the other biscuits for maybe a future meal. If she really enjoys this one, I can always make it for her again. And then on the same sheet pan, I'll just kind of bulk it out with some chicken strips. I'll just fill in as much space as I can. The only thing I will say about these chicken strips is kind of how inconsistent they are in size. You can see you've got some big ones, you've got some tiny ones. Typically I try to kind of cook all the big ones together and save the small ones for another batch. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 chicken tenders, chicken strips, and then 8 biscuits. And then as soon as my potatoes are done, this will go in the oven. So now is as good a time as any to work on the country gravy then. Now, I did mention that this is a good breakfast if you can't eat pork. I am using sausage fat to make the gravy, but if you can't eat pork, then you could just swap the sausage fat for something like butter or oil to make the gravy. So I'm gonna add a couple of tablespoons of all-purpose flour into my sausage fat. Give that a whisk. And I'm gonna let that cook on medium to medium high heat for a couple minutes just to cook out the raw flour taste. I typically make my roux a little bit thicker like this when I'm making country gravy. That is the way that I've always done it, and I have been making country gravy since I was about 12, 13 years old, so long time. One of the first things that I learned how to actually cook when I was a kid, because my mom would bring me to church, and on Sundays I would go in early and cook breakfast for the congregation, and there was an older gentleman, his name was John, and one of the first things that John taught me how to cook was biscuits and gravy. So I did have a comment from somebody who said, I sure do love my biscuits and gravy, and yes, I do. I grew up in North Carolina, and I love biscuits and gravy. It's one of my favorite breakfasts. So it's kind of 2-2-2. I started off with about 2 tablespoons of fat and added about 2 tablespoons of flour. Now I'm going to add about 2 cups of milk, give or take. I don't really measure it. You can measure it if you want to. So add your milk a little bit at a time, trying to make sure the mixture stays nice and smooth. I start out with just a little bit and then I add a little bit more each time I add. Like I said, I've been making this for so long, I don't really measure anything anymore. I just kind of go with the flow of it. I feel like that's how a lot of Southern cooks make their gravy. I've seen some people making gravy and they're adding all sorts of stuff to it. All you need to add to it is salt and pepper. It's not going to taste like anything until you add salt and pepper to it. Taste it as you go. If it's too salty, add more milk. If it's too bland, add more salt and pepper. But you can't get it wrong. So I did just taste it and it's kind of milky. So I'm going to go in with some extra salt and pepper. Gravy's simmering away. I'm going to toss the potatoes, give them another check. They're looking a lot more roasty toasty. I'm going to let those cool briefly before I pack them up. But now we can go and toss our biscuits and our chicken in the oven. About 18 minutes. And again, we are moving along, we are multitasking. Time is of the essence here. I made the Aussie chicken last week, which they did both really enjoy, except for she said that she doesn't like broccoli. Her grandson, however, did like the broccoli. So at some point I might try to make different meals for each of them, catered to their own tastes. But I thought that since I did chicken last week, I'm going to do some different meals this week. One of the things I'm going to make her this week is meatloaf. Oop, that one's upside down. I have 2 packages of 85/15 beef. I have a box of stuffing mix. This is a shortcut version of meatloaf because the stuffing mix is your bread, your binder, it's already pre-seasoned. And then the only other things you need are eggs and ketchup. Michael, my boyfriend, doesn't like meatloaf, so that is something that I almost never get to make, and so I'm excited to be able to make it today. I love meatloaf, so if I make it, I'm making it just for me. We're gonna go into a large bowl with both of our packages of beef. These are about 1 pound each, so about 2 pounds of 85/15. I am using a lower fat volume because you don't want your meatloaf to just be swimming in oil. I feel like that bowl's not quite big enough. I'm gonna add in the stuffing mix. Yeah, bowl is just barely big enough. 2 eggs. I'm gonna add ketchup directly into the meatloaf, and I'm gonna do ketchup on top. So 1/2 cup in the meatloaf, along with about 1/2 cup of water to help rehydrate the stuffing. And now we're gonna mix that all together. I cut out the mixing of the meatloaf because I guarantee you're not gonna wanna watch that process. I wouldn't wanna watch that process. We all know how to make meatloaf. Mix it together. Use a mixer if you prefer not to get your hands dirty. Like a stand mixer with a paddle attachment. And now into a greased loaf pan. I just sprayed mine with some nonstick cooking spray and form that into a loaf. I wanted to make individual loaves. I used to have this pan. It's like a cupcake pan. It had like little mini loaves. It made 6 individual loaves, but I must have at some point gotten rid of it because I looked for it and I couldn't find it anywhere. Top it with some ketchup before I bake it, and then I might add more ketchup as it bakes. All right, so I'm gonna set that aside. I'm gonna put it in the fridge for a little bit until I'm ready to pop it in the oven. I think we're ready to work on our breakfast bowls. The potatoes have cooled slightly, so now is a good time to pack that up. Start by making a bed of potatoes. I have 6 containers, but this might only make 4 meals. I did have a couple of people talk about the portion size, and that's something that, like, you know, if she doesn't eat the entire meal, I'd rather give her too much than not enough. I don't want, you know, again, this is her and her grandson. I don't know his appetite size, so I don't want to make assumptions that they just don't eat much and do like half portions on anything. So and then next we're going to go in with our crumbled sausage. There was one thing I wanted to talk about, and that was like, what is meal preppable? Because honestly, anything is meal preppable as long as you're okay with eating leftovers. Some things are not going to be as good reheated, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's not meal preppable. The other thing is it freezable? And the question and answer to is it freezable, I say look at the freezer section of your grocery store. That is a pretty good place to start, because if you can buy it frozen, you can freeze it, typically. That's my rule of thumb. If I can buy it frozen, I can freeze it. So these breakfast bowls are kind of like the Jimmy Dean breakfast bowls. Throw some cheese on top of that. These are pretty well cooled, so I'm gonna go ahead and pop the lids on each one. But I also need to label these, because last time I gave them to her, I made sure to include a label on each one, just with a description of the meal, as well as like a title for it, so that she can become familiar with the meal preps over time and like know what it is and whether she likes it. I'm only gonna be giving her 4 this go around, and the other 2 I will freeze, so that hopefully I can build a collection of meals in my freezer so that when I'm making meals for her, I can integrate some variety into it as well. These are our biscuits and chicken tenders out of the oven. So you can see these biscuits look fantastic. So there's the frozen biscuits, which are nice and brown on top. They look really light and fluffy. That's what I'm saying. They're just as good as homemade biscuits. They're not the canned kind, so don't worry about that. I have been using them for years, and honestly, I got to the point where I just stopped making biscuits from scratch because these were just easier. No fuss, no mess, and they're amazing. So I'm gonna let these cool slightly as well. And now's the time where I'm gonna pop the meatloaf in the oven. The reason I wanted to make mini loaves was so I didn't have to wait so long for this to cook, because this is gonna take close to an hour to cook in its loaf form, probably about 55 to 60 minutes. Let's pack up these country chicken breakfast bowls. So I just take the chicken and I cut it into bite-sized pieces. Is it going to be crispy once it's reheated in the microwave? No. But this is something I mentioned that I have meal prepped for Michael and I a lot. It's one of our favorites, and I wouldn't be making it if I wasn't sure that it's delicious. Although typically when I make it for he and I don't make the gravy from scratch. I just use the packet of gravy. Nothing is as good microwaved as it is when it's fresh. And that's just something that's the trade-off with meal prep. I'm gonna cut each biscuit in half. When I'm making these for Michael and I tend to chunk up the biscuits, but I'm gonna keep them pretty whole for her. And then we're gonna top each one with some of our chicken chunks. Just divide them evenly between the 4 containers. And then the last thing to add is gonna be that country gravy. I just drizzle it over the top. Again, just dividing it between the containers equally. Both of these breakfasts that I made her are kind of like diner style breakfasts. Meatloaf's in the oven. For the sides for the meatloaf, I'm just doing mashed potatoes and green beans. That will be quick. I will do that after the meatloaf is cooked. I'm gonna make her a soup this week. Specifically, I'm gonna make her the Olive Garden Zuppa Toscana. I am swapping out the kale for spinach though, because I don't know how she likes kale. I like kale, but spinach is a little bit more versatile. One thing that's always interested me is mass food production. I had a friend who was in the Air Force, and her job in the Air Force was running the kitchen. She was in the reserve, so she only went on the base once a month. But it was always interesting to me how they had to plan their menu, because they're cooking for a lot of people, but also they're having to like work within a certain budget, meet certain nutritional guidelines, and even more so to the point, not waste food. So she would always come home with these big baskets of bananas and apples and things after a drill. So I watch a few videos, I watch a few channels on YouTube and on TikTok. One of the things I really enjoy watching are Japanese kitchens, more specifically they're like these restaurants in Japan that make these really inexpensive bulk, they call bento boxes. And you usually see them kind of advertised on YouTube because they sell these big boxes of food for just a few dollars. So they're a really cheap way to feed yourself. And they're typically like a lot of rice, a lot of fried foods. I love watching those videos. They're very relaxing. Usually they're just quiet and they're just cooking Japanese food. In the same regard of the bulk cooking, another thing I really enjoy watching are lunch lady cooking videos or daycare cooking videos. The idea of cooking for kids is very interesting to me, but even more so, it kind of encompasses the bulk aspect of it, having to cook for a large group of people. It certainly changes the dynamic, and you need a lot more tools and equipment when you're cooking for more people. And maybe that's something later on down the line that I'll look into a bit more. I did have some requests, related to donations for this process. And as I mentioned, I pinned it in my last video, but I'm not doing this to take donations. I get to make the videos, I get to put out the content. The person gets meals in exchange. It's entirely self-sustaining. I did have somebody suggest that maybe I make an Amazon wish list for some equipment that I might need, and that might be later on down the line. But again, I don't want this to be an endeavor that anybody thinks that I'm doing this for the money. I'm doing this because it's what I love to do. And it's something I've been always very passionate about, is working with people or cooking for people. And as I mentioned earlier, I've just been lacking that aspect and trying to find fulfillment and purpose, but it's not my intention for this to be crowdfunded in any sort of way. So as you can see, I diced an onion and now I'm going to mince some garlic. And then the last thing to do is to peel, and I'm gonna dice the potatoes. I know typically it's Zuppa Toscana is made with sliced potatoes. How many potatoes? Probably 4 to 6, I'm gonna say. I have 6 here, so it might be all 6 because it's gonna be a pretty big batch of soup. When I peel potatoes, I don't typically wash them first because I'm gonna be peeling them, but what I do is I'll put them in a bowl and I'll fill this up with water. And that'll just kind of rinse off the potatoes as I peel them, but it'll also prevent them from oxidizing or turning that kind of brownish, pinkish color, which doesn't affect the flavor of potatoes, but it does affect the presentation. So I think I'm gonna split the difference between dicing and slicing the potatoes, and I'm just gonna go with kind of half moon slices. Firm potatoes. Goodness. Sticking to my knife. I always do the meat last, and the last thing I'm gonna do is, I did get the link sausage because it was on sale. I got mild because I don't know what her spice tolerance is, so this is just mild Italian sausage, and I'm just gonna remove the casing from it because then we have ground sausage. Meatloaf out of the oven. That looks amazing, and I'm gonna let that cool while we get started cooking the soup. Gotta bust out the big ol' soup pot for the Zuppa Toscana. I'm gonna preheat this over medium-high heat. By the way, just in case this comes up, this pot is not dirty. It is a hand-me-down. It is old. It is cast iron. It's just stained, but it's clean. So let's hit up our Italian sausage. I am going to be adding some red pepper flake in with the sausage, but I'm going to be a little light-handed with this because, again, I don't know her spice preference, so only like about a teaspoon. This is going to be a pretty big batch of soup, but red pepper flake is common in Zuppa Toscana. I'm going to go in with my diced onion. And minced garlic. Next thing I'm going to be adding is an entire carton of low sodium chicken broth, so about 4 cups. And 2 cups of water. Let that come up to a boil. We're just about boiling, so I'm gonna go ahead and add in my potatoes. I did say this was gonna be a pretty big batch of soup, so I might end up having to freeze some of this as well. And then this is going to get covered and simmered until the potatoes are tender, which is probably only going to take 15 to 20 minutes or so. I think I'm good to slice into this meatloaf now, while my soup is simmering. I'm going to cut it into about 1-inch slices. So for a loaf pan like this, I'll get about, I want to say 8 slices. 6 slices for this loaf pan. I might save the ends for me, basically. So I'm going to do 4 of these meatloaf meal preps for her as well. And then the 2 little end pieces will probably be my lunch for today. I get so wrapped up in cooking for her that I oftentimes forget to feed myself on days like today. I feel like 4 of each meal is a little bit more of a realistic size than 6. I'm not gonna be able to put the lid on it with these meatloafs sticking out like this. So I think what I'm gonna have to do is lay them flat or kind of angle them. Probably have to lay them flat. I'll probably put some more ketchup on top so that it's more like apparent that it's meatloaf. And then hopefully that's enough room for me to still put some sides on there. All right, a little drizzle of ketchup on each one. I'm a little starving, so let's try this meatloaf. Make sure it's good. I am not gonna need that much though, so I'm just gonna cut myself a little piece. Something like that, teensy tiny. I like extra ketchup on mine. I like the hot meatloaf with cold ketchup. Like I said, I haven't had meatloaf in a long time because my boyfriend hates meatloaf. He can't stand it. One of the downfalls to these kind of longer cooking videos is that my microphone does not last that long. I'm about 3 hours into the process and it just died on me. So I'm probably gonna finish out this video without the mic and just hope that the audio is clear enough for you guys to follow along. My potatoes are tender. It only took about, like I said, 15 minutes. I think it's been only about 12 minutes because I had a 15-minute timer and still got 2 minutes left on it. But I just checked one and it fell apart, so it's good to go. I'm gonna add in a couple of handfuls of spinach. And just kind of let that wilt down. Also going to season this with some pepper. And salt, of course. And then the last thing I'm going to be adding in is probably about a cup to a cup and a half of half and half. Give a taste for seasonings. You'd be surprised how much flavor just salt and pepper can add to things. I would typically add more red pepper flake, but as I've mentioned, I'm trying to be a little bit cautious with the heat. I'm probably going to skim off some of this fat on top too, because I don't know how much she's going to like that. That's my favorite part of Zuppa Toscana, but it's not for me. It's for someone else. So I can always just kind of go through and ladle off some of that fat from the top. That looks a lot better. I think that's pretty good, so I'm going to let this cool a bit before we pack it up as well. While that cools, I'm going to get started on her sides for the meatloaf, which I'm doing mashed potatoes and green beans. So I'm going to start with the green beans, add in a couple tablespoons of butter into a skillet. Me sauteing one 12-ounce bag of cut green beans. Which I'm going to season with salt, pepper, a little bit of garlic powder, and onion powder. Get out that brown one. I want that in there. It looks not good. Okay. Really just wanted the green beans to be nice and light and bright, but again, she's going to be reheating this in the microwave, so not trying to overcook anything either. Potatoes for the meatloaf, I just went with this bag of baby red instant mash. I like these because they actually have like little chunks of potato in them, so again, they kind of have that homemade taste, homemade feeling to them. I can make mashed potatoes from scratch. Modern day instant mashed potatoes are pretty good. And in the meantime, I'm going to portion out her green beans. which the wooden spoon is definitely the most inefficient tool for this. And just like last time, I'm going to add a little bit of salt and pepper to these potatoes just to make them taste a little bit more homemade. Oops. No! It dripped on my meatloaf. Try to keep it pretty and distinct. A little bit more in there. Specifically for this meatloaf, these are pretty hefty portions. I will say that. I don't even think I would be able to eat this entire thing. I would probably, for me, like half of that is about a serving. But there is our meatloaf. I'm gonna try to fix that little dribble of potato I got there. There is one more meal that I want to try to make, and I saved it for last because it was like an if time permits, because I had such a short window when it came to this, and I might have time. I realistically wanted to be done by 3:30 because I still want to label these. So I gotta make labels, label them, pack them, all that stuff. These potatoes are still cooling, so I'm not gonna put a lid on those quite yet. The soup is also still cooling a bit. The soup I won't pack in these containers. I'll put those in something else. But I'm debating if I have time, because that's only like 45 minutes and I probably need about an hour. Oof. What I want to make is Panda Express, like sweet fire chicken. So chicken, breaded chicken with Thai sweet chili sauce, peppers, pineapples, onions. It would be a really nice meal. It would really contrast with everything else that I've made today. We have an Italian soup, we have an American meatloaf, we have a couple of diner style breakfasts, and then kind of like a stir fry, something kind of Asian American inspired. Something kind of Asian American inspired. Wow, something kind of Asian American inspired. Just because it would be a nice contrast, and try to squeeze it in. What I might do is take a pause, go make all my labels, then come back. That way I don't feel like I'm rushing at the last minute. So let me make all the labels and then we'll work on the final dish. Alright, so all the labels are made, but I don't think I'm gonna have time to make the 5th meal that I wanted to make today. If I had an extra hour, I'd be fine with it. I don't want to feel rushed and then not do a good job at making it either. So it's something that I know is going to take a good bit of time because it involves breading and frying a bunch of chicken. So I'll just have to table that one, and I'll maybe make it for her next week instead. I've got my labels. This is what they look like. I do them on the Cricut. I do put a use or freeze by date, which is 5 days from the date that I made them. And I can label each one. For the soup, I'm going to use these round containers, although I thought I had slightly larger bowls than this. These are only like, I think these are only like 1.5 cups, and I was really aiming for like 2 cups, but I will probably just have to pick up some different bowls down the road. Some of these still made parfaits in these last time. It looks like someone didn't get really clean in the dishwasher. Okay. So let's portion out our soup. Try not to get it too brothy. Let me try to get some of the filling. Maybe it'll be the perfect size for her though. Who knows? Check for, make sure there's no leaks. Okay. Make sure they're nice and tight. Try to think of everything that I possibly can. Alright, we're good on that. Okay. And then I just need to label the breakfast that I made earlier. These ones are the Farmer's Breakfast Bowls. And then we have the Country Chicken and Biscuits. to be a wrap because I don't have time to make the fifth meal, as I mentioned. I wish I did. I'm gonna have to do that one for her later, but I do think we have a nice spread of meals here, and I hope she enjoys them. As always, I will let you guys know next week whenever I get the feedback. The neighbor is coming by in about an hour to pick these up, and I don't want to rush through the last one. So we're gonna call this good for today, and hopefully she enjoys everything. I enjoy cooking it. Hope you guys enjoy watching it. Have a fantastic day, and I will see you again soon.